The mansion on Blackwood Hill. I'd never wanted to move into the mansion. When my parents told me we were leaving the city for a fresh start in the countryside, I thought they meant a nice little farmhouse or maybe a place near the woods where I could ride my bike in peace. But when the moving truck turned the corner and the towering silhouette of Blackwood Manor appeared on the hill, I felt something heavy settle in my chest. The house loomed over the landscape like it was watching us. Its tall, narrow windows were dark and empty, its gray stone walls cracked and stained with age. The iron gates creaked open as though they hadn't been touched in decades. I remember looking at my little sister, Emily. She was only 9, and seeing the excitement in her eyes. She thought it looked like a castle. To me, it looked like a tomb. Mom and Dad tried to act enthusiastic. "Isn't it beautiful?" Mom said, brushing her hair out of her face, as if that would help her smile look more real. Dad gripped the steering wheel and nodded. "It has character, a lot of history." He was right about the history part. Even before we moved in, I had overheard locals whispering at the diner where we stopped for lunch. They lowered their voices when we walked past, but I caught bits and pieces. "Family slaughtered. Nobody found the killer. Cursed place. Should have been torn down years ago." I told myself they were just trying to scare us. Small town gossip, you know? But when we parked in front of that mansion and I looked up at the ivy-covered stone and the rotting shutters, I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were keeping secrets. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and something else I couldn't place, like old smoke or maybe decay. The floor groaned under our feet with every step. Dust swirled in the air, glittering in the weak light that filtered through the grimy windows. The rooms were enormous, but empty. My voice echoed back to me when I called for Emily. She was already running up the stairs, her laughter ringing like a bell through the hollow halls. It didn't sound right. It sounded too sharp, too loud. I wanted to tell her to stop, but my parents were too busy talking about renovations and furniture placement to notice. That night, lying in my new bedroom, I couldn't sleep. The house made noises. Groaning, whispering noises that I told myself were just pipes or the wind. But at some point, I swore I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate footsteps. When I gathered the courage to peek out, the corridor was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was standing just beyond the edge of the shadows, watching me. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning. The mansion wasn't just old. It wasn't just abandoned. It was alive in a way no house should ever be. And before long, it would show us why the last family who lived here had never made it out alive. Whispers in the walls. The first week in the mansion felt like walking through someone else's life. Even though the place had been empty for years, there were things left behind. Scraps of wallpaper peeling off, water-stained photographs forgotten in drawers, a child's shoe tucked under a bed frame in one of the upstairs rooms. Mom said it was sad but charming. To me, it felt wrong, like the house hadn't been abandoned at all, just waiting. At night, the unease grew sharper. The creaks of the house weren't random. They had a rhythm. Sometimes they sounded like footsteps, pacing back and forth on the upper floors, even when I knew everyone else was asleep. Once, I woke to Emily's voice whispering through the wall between our rooms. I pressed my ear against the plaster, but when I called her name, she didn't answer. A few seconds later, her door opened, and she shuffled in wearing her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "I had a dream. A lady was crying in the hallway. She asked me to help her." I told her it was just a nightmare, but the look on her face told me she didn't believe that. Honestly, neither did I. The strangest thing happened 3 nights later. I was exploring the basement, flashlight in hand. The air down there was icy cold, far colder than it should have been, and it smelled of damp earth. The walls were rough stone, carved into the hill itself, and in the far corner I found an old trunk covered in cobwebs. My fingers shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were brittle sheets of paper, letters, I think, though the ink had faded so badly I could only make out a few words. Blood, betrayal, they will never know. Before I could read further, I heard something behind me. A low sound, like breathing. I spun around, sweeping my flashlight across the basement. Nothing, just shadows stretching across the stone walls. But the breathing didn't stop. It grew louder, faster, as if whoever or whatever it belonged to was getting closer. I bolted up the stairs so fast I nearly tripped. When I slammed the basement door shut, the sound stopped. That night, I dreamt of the family who lived here before us. I didn't know their names, but I saw them clearly. A father at the head of a long dining table, a mother clutching her daughter's hand, and a boy about my age, staring straight at me. His eyes were wide, hollow, and filled with something I couldn't name, something between terror and desperation. Then blood spread across the table like spilled wine, and I woke up gasping. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? My parents would say it was just nerves, just my imagination. Emily might believe me, but I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. Still, I knew something was wrong. The whispers, the dreams, the breathing in the basement, they weren't random. They were signs. The house wanted something from us. I just didn't know what. The first signs. By the second week, I stopped pretending everything was fine. The house wasn't just creaking or settling. It was reacting, watching, testing us. It started small. A door would slam even though no windows were open. A chair scraped across the dining room floor in the middle of the night when no one was in there. Dad blamed drafts. Mom said the wood was just shifting. But I saw the way they avoided looking at each other when these things happened. They knew it wasn't normal. Emily was the most affected. She would wake up crying, saying the lady was back. She claimed the woman stood outside her bedroom, her long hair covering her face, whispering things Emily couldn't understand. One morning, she showed me her arm. It had thin red scratches running down it, like someone had dragged their nails across her skin while she slept. I wanted to tell Mom and Dad, but I didn't. Something inside me whispered that they couldn't help, that whatever lived in this house wasn't here for them. The next incident happened in the library. I was looking through shelves of dusty books, most of them unreadable from mold and age, when one practically leapt off the shelf. It landed at my feet with a dull thud. When I picked it up, I realized it wasn't just any book. It was a diary. The leather cover was cracked and nearly falling apart, but the name carved into it was still visible. Eleanor Blackwood. I didn't know it then, but Eleanor had been the mother of the family who once lived here. My hands shook as I flipped through the first few pages. The entries began innocently enough. Talks about the children, her love for the gardens, her husband's business trips. But as the pages went on, her words grew darker, frantic. She wrote about voices in the house, about waking up to see figures standing at the foot of her bed, her children whispering things they couldn't possibly know. One last entry stopped my breath cold. If anyone finds this, please know that he is not who he seems. He has changed. I fear for myself, for the children. The walls are stained with secrets, and I don't know if we'll live long enough to escape them. The ink trailed off there, smeared as if her hand had been yanked away mid-sentence. That night, I heard the crying. Not Emily's, not this time. It was a woman, her sobs drifting through the hallways like a fog. I followed the sound to the landing of the main staircase. The air was icy, so cold my breath puffed in front of me. At the bottom of the stairs stood a figure in white, shoulders shaking as she wept into her hands. I couldn't move. My legs felt nailed to the floor. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her face was pale, streaked with shadows, her eyes dark pits that locked onto mine. And then, she was gone. The sobbing stopped. The house went still again. But I knew I hadn't imagined her. I had seen Eleanor Blackwood with my own eyes, and she wanted me to find the truth. Shadows at the edges. The mansion was no longer pretending. The things that happened inside its walls could not be blamed on wind or old pipes anymore. They were deliberate, too deliberate. One evening at dinner, it began. We were eating in the vast dining room, the long table stretching out beneath a chandelier that swayed though no window was open. Dad was in the middle of talking about his plans to renovate the east wing when the chandelier's lights flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness. Emily whimpered. Mom reached for her hand. Then, from the far end of the table, a sharp knock echoed. Not a polite knock, but a pounding, like a fist slamming against wood. Once, twice, 3 times. Dad stood, his chair screeching against the floor. "Hello?" he called out, trying to sound brave. His voice trembled anyway. No answer, just silence, so heavy it made my ears ring. Then the candles on the table flared to life, though no one had lit them. Their flames bent in one direction, as if blown by a breath we couldn't feel. Mom wanted to leave the room, but Dad insisted we stay. "Old wiring," he muttered, though even he didn't believe it. I could see it in his eyes. He was shaken. We all were. That night, I couldn't sleep again. My door creaked open in the small hours, and I thought it was Emily coming to crawl into my bed like she sometimes did after her nightmares. But when I sat up, the doorway was empty. The door slowly closed itself with a soft click. I wasn't alone, though. I felt it, a presence in the corner of my room. I forced my eyes toward it, my breath trapped in my throat. The shadows seemed to bend, thickening until the shape of a man emerged. Tall, rigid shoulders, his head cocked at an unnatural angle, watching me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. And then, like smoke, he was gone. The next morning, I found something on my desk, a page torn from Eleanor's diary. I hadn't left it there, I was sure of it. The entry was scrawled, frantic. He comes at night. The children do not understand. I cannot protect them anymore. The truth is buried, but it will not stay hidden. When I showed it to Emily, her eyes widened. She whispered, "That's the lady. She wants us to help her." Later that day, while my parents argued about whether the house was safe, Emily tugged at my sleeve and led me upstairs to her room. She pointed at the wall above her bed. At first I saw nothing. Then I stepped closer and my stomach dropped. Carved into the wood, as if by fingernails, were words. "Help us."
The night of screams. By then, we all knew the mansion was haunted. Even Dad, who had been stubbornly insisting there was a logical explanation, stopped pretending after that night. It began with the storm. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rattled the glass, and the whole house seemed to groan under the weight of the wind. We had gathered in the living room for safety, Mom knitting nervously, Dad staring into the fire, Emily curled up beside me. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, then out. Only the fire remained, its glow twitching across the walls. That's when the voices started. At first, it sounded like the wind slipping through cracks, but soon it grew clearer, layered whispers spilling from every direction. A chorus of voices, men, women, children, all murmuring over each other. Mom covered her ears. "Do you hear that?" Emily clutched my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. "They're calling us." The whispers rose into screams. The fire roared higher, spitting sparks. Books toppled from shelves. A picture frame flew from the wall and shattered at Dad's feet. He shouted, "Enough!" His voice cracked with fear more than anger. But the house didn't stop. It grew angrier. The rug beneath us rippled as if something crawled beneath it. The curtains whipped around as though caught in a gale, though every window was locked tight. And in the center of the room, right above the flames, a shape appeared, shimmering, translucent, shifting. It was the woman, Eleanor, her face pale, hollow, her mouth opening and closing in a silent cry. Behind her, 3 smaller figures flickered in and out of the light. A man, a girl, a boy, the family. Emily sobbed, "They're trapped." The apparition's mouth moved faster, her arms reaching toward us. The whispers swelled into words, harsh and broken. "Find the truth, blood, betrayal." Then the fire burst with a deafening crack, and the spirits vanished. The room was silent again, save for the storm outside. We sat frozen in the dark, our hearts racing. None of us spoke for what felt like hours. Finally, Dad muttered, We should leave tomorrow." But deep down, I knew it was too late. The house wouldn't let us leave until we did what it wanted. until we uncovered what happened to Eleanor and her family. And somehow I knew it was up to me.
Secrets in the dark. The day after the storm, Dad packed a suitcase. He said we'd leave by evening, but evening came and the car refused to start. The engine groaned, sputtered, then died. Even when Dad called the mechanic from town, the phone line went dead the moment he mentioned our address. It was as if the mansion itself had locked us in. That night, I lay awake listening. The house wasn't silent, it never was, but the noises had changed. No longer whispers or distant footsteps. Now it was a steady thump, 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 like a heartbeat pulsing through the walls. It made my skin crawl. I remembered the diary. Eleanor had been trying to tell me something. So the next morning, while my parents argued in the kitchen about what to do, I went back to the library. Dust choked the air, and sunlight cut through in thin, pale beams. I searched the shelves again, running my fingers over the spines until I found the diary where I'd left it. But when I opened it, pages were missing, torn out. My stomach sank. Someone or something didn't want me to know the full story. I almost gave up, but then I noticed something strange. The shelf where the diary had been was deeper than the others, hollow almost. I pressed against the back panel, and with a low groan, the wood shifted inward. My heart jumped. Behind the shelf was a narrow passage, dark as pitch, smelling of earth and mildew. I hesitated only a second before stepping inside with my flashlight. The corridor twisted down into the foundations of the house. The further I went, the colder it grew, until I could see my breath in the beam of light. Cobwebs brushed my face. My footsteps echoed too loud, like I wasn't alone. At the end of the passage was a small wooden door. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The room beyond was small and low, the ceiling barely above my head. It looked like a cellar, but not for food or wine. This was different. The walls were lined with old papers, letters, and broken furniture. In the center was a table, its surface darkened with stains I didn't want to identify, and scattered across it were more diary pages. I picked one up, my pulse hammering. The writing was frantic, the ink smeared. He has changed. The man I married is gone. His eyes so cold. He speaks of voices guiding him, demanding sacrifice. I fear what he will do. If this is my last entry, know that he... The page ended in a jagged tear. Behind me, the door creaked. I spun, but the passage was empty. My flashlight flickered. The air grew colder still. And then, in the corner of the cellar, a figure shifted. A boy, maybe 12, his face pale and hollow, his eyes locked on mine. He lifted a hand and pointed at the table. His mouth moved soundlessly. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. I staggered back, my chest heaving, but I understood. They wanted me to finish Eleanor's story. They wanted me to uncover what her husband had done. And I
was the only one listening. The face of the killer. After the cellar, I couldn't shake the boy's face from my mind. His hollow stare followed me through the day. His silent plea etched into my thoughts. I knew he wanted me to keep digging. So I did. When Dad drove into town to beg for a mechanic again, I slipped away to the library with the torn diary pages stuffed into my pocket. I spent hours piecing them together, laying them across the floor like a puzzle. Though many entries were missing, a picture started to form. Eleanor's husband, Richard Blackwood, had changed near the end. She wrote about his sudden rages, his muttering to himself, his obsession with voices only he could hear. One entry made my blood run cold. He says the house speaks to him, that it promises power if he obeys. I hear him at night talking to the walls. Sometimes I think the walls answer. I stopped reading when I heard a noise. Not footsteps this time, but a sharp intake of breath. I looked up. Across the room, standing in the dim light, was Eleanor herself. Her face was clearer than before, her hollow eyes glistening with grief. She raised a trembling hand, pointing not at me, but at the wall. Then her lips moved. I heard the words as if they were pressed directly into my mind. See. The library dissolved around me. Suddenly, I wasn't in the mansion as I knew it. I stood in the same library, but brighter, filled with polished wood and warm light. I saw Richard Blackwood, tall and severe, pacing as his children sat at the table, their eyes downcast. His voice was sharp, commanding, though I couldn't make out the words. Eleanor appeared beside them, clutching her daughter. Her lips trembled as she tried to reason with him. But Richard's face was twisted, his eyes dark and unrecognizable, like something had hollowed him out from the inside. He slammed his fist on the table. The children flinched. Then his eyes turned, straight toward me. For a split second, I swore he saw me. His gaze locked on my own, and a cold, cruel smile spread across his face. The vision shattered. I fell back onto the dusty library floor, gasping. The diary pages scattered around me. It wasn't just ghosts haunting this place. It was Richard. He hadn't just killed his family. He was still here, in the walls, in the shadows, in the whispers, watching, waiting. And if I didn't uncover the full truth, I feared he would do it again. Richard's shadow. After the vision, I couldn't escape him. Richard Blackwood. His name felt like a curse, whispering in my mind every time the house fell silent. That night, I tried to sleep, but the darkness in my room was alive. Shadows twisted along the ceiling, crawling across the walls like insects. My lamp flickered, sputtered, and died. And then in the corner, he was there, his tall figure barely visible, his head cocked at that awful angle, grinning as if he had been waiting for me. "Stay away," I whispered, though my voice was barely a breath. He stepped closer. His eyes glowed faintly, two burning coals in the dark. The air grew so cold my skin stung. I couldn't move. My body felt locked, pinned by his gaze. And then in my mind, his voice hissed, "You don't belong here. Leave my secrets buried or join us." The shadows surged forward, swallowing me whole. I felt a crushing weight on my chest, a hand like ice clamping over my mouth. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. At the last second, a soft cry pierced the darkness. Emily's voice. "Stop it!" The weight vanished. I sat up, gasping. Emily stood in the doorway, her small frame trembling, her face pale. "I saw him too," she whispered. "The bad man. He was in my room yesterday. He tried to pull me out of bed." I pulled her close, my heart pounding. There was no denying it anymore. Richard wasn't just a memory. His spirit was here, violent and vengeful. The next day, I went back to the hidden cellar. My flashlight flickered weakly, but I forced myself to look again at the table with its scattered papers. This time I found something I had missed before, a folded note, stained and brittle. It was Eleanor's handwriting. "If anyone survives this house, know that Richard has been consumed by it. He speaks to it, obeys it. The night it happened, he said the voices demanded blood. He locked the doors. He said only death would please them. He killed the children first." The words blurred as my hands shook. I forced myself to keep reading. "And then he came for me." The note ended there, the paper torn. My stomach twisted. Richard had murdered them all, not out of madness alone, but because something in the house commanded it. And now his spirit was bound to it, still hungry, still dangerous. As I stuffed the note into my pocket, I heard a whisper, low, guttural, not Eleanor this time. "Richard, you're next." The night after I found Eleanor's note, the mansion finally showed us its true face. It began with Emily's scream. I jolted awake and ran to her room, my heart hammering. She was thrashing on the bed, her tiny hands clawing at the sheets as if something invisible was dragging her away. Her eyes were wide open, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the ceiling, at him. Richard's shadow loomed above her, stretched across the plaster like a giant spider. His voice shook the walls. "She is mine." I lunged forward and grabbed Emily, pulling her free. But the moment I touched her, the entire house erupted. The floor shook violently, furniture toppled, windows shattered inward, spraying glass across the rooms. Doors slammed one after another, trapping us inside. Mom and Dad came running, but before they could reach us, the hallway between us seemed to stretch, growing longer and longer until they were impossibly far away. Emily clung to me, sobbing, "Don't let him take me." The walls bled shadows. Richard's form flickered in and out of the darkness, moving closer with every pulse of the house's heartbeat. His eyes blazed like fire, and his grin stretched too wide, too inhuman. Mom screamed my name, but I couldn't hear her anymore. Richard's voice filled my skull, deep and venomous. "The house chose you, and now it chooses you." Suddenly, I wasn't in Emily's room anymore. I was standing in the dining hall, the one from my visions. The long table stretched before me, covered in dishes stained with dried blood. The Blackwood family sat around it, lifeless, their faces pale and twisted with fear. And at the head of the table was Richard. His eyes locked on mine, and he raised a knife, slick with red. I knew this wasn't just a vision. This was him dragging me into his world, the world of the house where he still ruled. But behind him I saw them, Eleanor and the children. Their spirits stood in the shadows, watching me, not accusing, not angry, pleading. They wanted me to finish what Eleanor had started, to expose Richard, to end his hold over this place. The ground shook again, and I snapped back into Emily's room. My parents had finally reached us, their faces pale with terror. I clutched Eleanor's torn note in my hand. It felt like a weapon, though I didn't yet know how to use it. But one thing was clear. If we didn't face Richard now, none of us would survive the night. The house was alive with fury. The walls groaned, the floorboards buckled, and the air burned with Richard's laughter. My family huddled behind me, but I knew this fight was mine. The torn diary pages were still clutched in my hand. Eleanor's words burned in my mind. He speaks to the house. He obeys it. If this is my last entry. Richard stepped from the shadows, more solid now, more human, though his face twisted in ways no living man's ever could. His eyes locked on mine, full of hunger. "You belong to me," he hissed. "The house wants blood. It always has." I lifted the note, my voice shaking, but steady enough. "No, the house didn't choose you. You chose to listen. You killed them, your family. It was you, Richard." His smile faltered. "You wanted power," I shouted over the groaning walls, "but all you got was chains. You're not the master of this house. You're its prisoner." The shadows around him recoiled, writhing as though my words had cut into them. Eleanor appeared then, her pale form glowing faintly. The children stood at her side, their hollow eyes fixed on Richard, not with fear this time, but with accusation. "Father," the boy's spirit whispered, his voice trembling but clear. "You did this." Richard roared, the sound shaking the entire mansion. He lunged toward me, his form stretching like smoke, his hands outstretched. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd take me, drag me into the dark with him. But Eleanor stepped between us. She raised her hand, her voice ringing out like thunder. "No more!" The room exploded with light. Richard screamed, his figure splitting apart, dissolving into ash and shadow. The walls shook one final time, then stilled. And in the silence that followed, Eleanor turned to me. Her face softened, her hollow eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she and the children faded, their forms dissolving into the air, leaving nothing but peace in their wake. The house was silent, truly silent, for the first time since we arrived. We left Blackwood Manor the very next morning. My parents never spoke of what happened, though I saw the fear in their eyes whenever the word mansion came up. Emily would sometimes ask if the lady was safe now. I always told her yes, but I still dream of Richard's eyes burning through the dark. And sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I wonder if the house is waiting for someone else to listen.